In this episode of the Cole Memo, I sit down with Tom Howard and Chris Fonts. Before we jump into the conversation, I wanted to share a quick word about why I find the progress that has been made with hemp to be so fascinating. Cannabis policy today feels like a situation where beggars can't be choosers. And right now, we are the beggars. We're begging for relief from the outdated policies that have shaped this landscape since the beginning of the drug war. I believe we have to accept victories where we can find them. In the past, these wins were built around the definitions we created. For instance, California's 1996 introduction of medical cannabis established an entirely new legal framework. And while it's still true that cannabis has clear medicinal benefits, we would be remiss if we did not acknowledge that medical cannabis was the Trojan horse for adult use cannabis. So, what began as a medical exception evolved into what we now call legal cannabis. I put legal in air quotes because most legalization efforts have built in limitations. And if you exceed those limitations or step out of line even slightly, the primary enforcement mechanism is still the criminal law. This was one of the main focuses of my mini documentary, which you can stream now for free at colememo.com/minidoc. I'll drop that link in the show notes if that makes it easier for you to check it out. These limitations and restrictions govern how much cannabis you can legally possess or purchase. Caps on dosage and purchases originated from the era of medicinal and adult use cannabis, where accurate labeling and dosing were essential for patient safety and cultural acceptance. While it's still crucial for consumers to know how much they're consuming, the amount or potency of cannabis a person can buy should ideally be guided by personal choice. To loosely quote attorney Rod Kite, limiting the amount of milligrams of THC and all other compounds is unworkable and essentially amounts to a nanny state method of addressing an issue that could and should instead be based on an adult's personal preference. In contrast, for the most part, these arbitrary limits do not exist with hemp. I can buy as much hemp as I want in the dosage I prefer, using my credit card in store or ordering it online for delivery. For example, I can purchase as many of these products as I want, or as many as a business like River Bluff Collective will allow me to. In case you didn't know, River Bluff is a licensed social equity cannabis brand in Illinois founded by three siblings who invested their life savings to secure a dispensary license and a cultivation license. They won a social equity lottery, enabling them to build their business with the support of an investment team. To sustain their operations, they've also embraced hemp, offering a wide range of quality hemp-derived products, including edibles, tinctures, and as you can see, beverages. These are one of my favorite products I've ever tried from the cannabis plant. All of these are available for legal delivery at riverbluffcollective.com. The freedom to buy as much cannabis as I want, need, or please, whether in store or online, is simply not part of the legal cannabis frameworks that exist in most states. That's why I find the progress we've made with hemp to be so compelling. It seems like a step toward treating cannabis like alcohol or other common consumer goods. In contrast, it still feels like cannabis regulations frame the cannabis plant as a controlled substance, which should be subject to heavy restrictions due to its inherent dangers. In short, hemp just feels more legal than cannabis does. And I've felt like that's something worth celebrating, and it's something that we should aim to extend to all forms of cannabis. This is where I tend to agree with people that argue against hemp based on the idea that the definition of hemp is arbitrary. But I think we must remember that if we're asking for relief from outdated cannabis laws, taking hemp's progress as a win is a step in the right direction. I think if we had been offered this type of regulation back in 1996 instead of the medical cannabis approach, we would have taken it as progress. Today, I just don't understand how the beggars have become choosers. I don't understand why we're hesitant to embrace a similar regulatory model for cannabis. Are the regulations for hemp perfect? Absolutely not. But is it better than what we currently have? In many ways, absolutely yes. And I'm not sure how anyone could argue otherwise. I'll just start this episode by addressing one of the few concerns that I do have with hemp. It currently lacks protections against monopolies or oligopolies. And while I'm not a fan of most cannabis regulations, I do appreciate the control that limits the number of licenses any one entity can hold. I believe we should never cap the total number of licenses issued, but we should prevent any single player from dominating the market. If we can introduce similar protections for hemp, along with standardized testing and labeling, I believe we could be closer to achieving meaningful cannabis policy reform than ever before. And with that, I'm going to send you into this week's episode of The Cole Memo. Enjoy. Well, let's do this, fellas. Chris, Tom, thank you both for sitting back down with me today, or rather sitting down with me today. Tom, this is you're returning to the podcast, but Chris, I just met you. And since I did just met you, do you mind introducing yourself to me and my audience, and then I'll have Tom reintroduce himself?
Certainly. Name is Chris Fonts, CEO and founder of Trojan Cannabis and High Spirits Beverages. I also volunteer in various amounts of trade associations. I'm the president of the U.S. Hemp Authority, on the board of the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, strategic advisor to Hemp Beverage Alliance, and policy chair for Cannabis Beverage Association.
Awesome. And you probably all recognize Tom because he's been on the show in the past and he's got a live show every Sunday, Cannabis Legalization News. Tom, lest I introduce you, please introduce yourself. Um,
Hi, my name's Tom. I am a monopolist, according to smear campaigns against me. I just make too much money, and everybody hates that I'm a lawyer. And then evidently, I shouldn't have won. I shouldn't have helped those people win those licenses this week or today in Delaware. That was oops, real faux pas there. But I'm down for legalizing marijuana, which I'm not sure if hemp people are, but totally down for legalizing marijuana and working towards that goal for the past 5 years. And that's kind of who I am.
Yep. And we've got, I meant to mention, I'll have Chris's website in the description. I'm displaying Tom's website. I'll have that in the description as well. CannabisIndustryLawyer.com for Tom's website. As Tom just said, if you need help getting licenses in the cannabis industry, Tom's a good person to get a hold of. Then just wanted to bounce back over to Chris's website really quick, TrojanHorseCannabis.com. And as I was telling you guys before we officially started recording, I don't really have a huge plan for today. I kind of wanted to just let this conversation naturally play out. And I feel like maybe the best way to do this, because this will just jump us right in, is tell us how we got to where we are today. Because, like, there's THCA flower being sent through the mail. People are getting THC sodas and edibles and stuff like that. How the fuck did this happen? And I think depending on our answers, that's probably where the debate goes. You understand? So,
Mm.
Tom, do you want
Well, I
to
think
lead off?
Chris is a great person to lead this off, as he started in cannabis prior to the farm. He started in hemp prior to the Farm Bill. And then did you ever farm hemp, Chris?
A very small amount, yeah.
Which
Yeah,
years?
it was an indoor grow. It wasn't a huge quantity. We also contracted with a greenhouse grower for some time. But
Which
I
years?
didn't. What's that?
When?
I was farming indoor in 2019, and we
What
contracted with a greenhouse
cultivars?
in 2020. It was actually Alpine Genetics. It was their Pink Panther. And then we actually imported some from Europe, Pink Kush. That was all, type 3 cannabis
Type
cultivars.
3.
Mhm.
No. Yeah. I think it's kind of interesting that nobody went with type 1 cultivars until maybe this year or last year. fairly brazenly. And so, what was the intention on those type 3 cultivars? And then, if you are joining, and we don't have to explain type 3 cultivars. Everybody knows who Ethan Russo is,
Yeah.
right? We have a very esoteric audience that are weed nerds. And so
Right.
that's one of the reasons why they're so opinionated and hate me so much. That, and I'm voting for Kamala Harris. And so, anyway, these cultivars, type 3, they have a THC CBD ratio of approximately 20-1, right? And by that, I mean 20 parts CBD, 1 part THC. And so, what was the goal with this crop?
Yeah, good question. So at the time, I was running a brand, Project Hemp Flower, and the impetus to run that brand was to create a marketplace where type 3 cannabis was being cultivated and processed like inhalable cannabis should be cultivated and processed, with good curing principles, all the things that all of the listeners I'm sure are aware of already. And there wasn't a lot of that in the space at the time. A lot of the smokable hemp that existed was cured improperly. It was brown, it smelled like hay, or they didn't have full panels, et cetera, et cetera. So we created a marketplace where we could curate that flower on behalf of the farm. We'd brand the farm, take really nice pictures, do our own independent testing to make sure that it was below 0.3 Delta 9, or at or below, as well as get a full pesticide, heavy metals, residual solvents, et cetera, mold and those things, microbials, so that the people buying these products knew that someone who cares about cannabis has vetted this. It's a good product at minimum, and it's clean, and it can be sent through the mail legally without me getting in trouble for it. So
Could
that
it
was
get you high?
what's that?
Could it get you high?
Absolutely, it could. Yeah, in
How
fact,
could it get you high?
because if you have a low tolerance, it doesn't take much to get high. We had several of our customers that had smoked when they were teenagers, and then they walked away from it, went into a dispensary, tried to buy a joint, blew their minds in a negative way, and were looking for, like, how can I have that experience I used to have? And I'm like, well, you can't have that experience with 22% flower. Not right now. Not until you build up a tolerance, not until you have some CBD in there. The cultivars you used to smoke are not like the cultivars of today. And so you had these, we'll say, older individuals that were looking for their previous experience. And you could smoke a full joint or even 2 joints in a session, and you'd get high, not obliterated, but you would absolutely get high. And that's what they were chasing. They didn't want, these aren't kids who are like, how jacked up can I get? It was, I had a rough day at work and I like sleeping well, so let me take the edge off.
Hmm. Now, did anybody tell Ron Wyden and Mitch McConnell this? Because Ron Wyden was quite clear in his hemp, he called it. Hemp will not get you high. The only thing you will do is waste your time, waste your breath, and waste your lighter fluid. That was what he told all the other lawmakers prior to getting them to vote for it. And Mitch McConnell, who is no friend to marijuana, which we've been trying to legalize, was also behind this. And so I don't think that they really intended people to be getting high from smoking cannabis called hemp back in 2018.
Yeah, whether that was the intention or not is a fool's errand to try to prove. I will say that Ron Wyden has released a bill that would codify the fact that you can get impaired from these products, and that's okay. Um,
Yeah.
the
And as
word
a
on the
marijuana
street
activist,
is,
that bill offends me because it literally defines cannabis in a way that accepts marijuana. So the whole reason we're here is because of marijuana. And then they've created the Cannabinoid Safety and Regulation Act, Ron Wyden, and it defines the cannabis plant in such a way that it doesn't include marijuana. And that just seems like extremely offensive to people that have been trying to legalize and normalize the plant. And then also, it's not the most slam dunk case that that bill that he's introduced will allow for semi-synthetic cannabinoids to be diffused into the population. It actually vests the authority in the FDA to be able to say whether or not it's on their safe list.
yeah, I mean, these are some true concepts. I think the offense you feel is ideological in nature and short-sighted. It's the same, it's people getting offended about Schedule 3. right? Which
Yeah.
I'm personally not a fan of. I think Schedule 3 is the wrong direction. I think it opens up some, I think it potentially goes the wrong way. But the
Yeah.
argument that it's a step towards the right direction, it's incremental progress, I support. And so while
It's
it wouldn't
it.
be my
Yeah.
choice to push Schedule 3, I certainly wouldn't want to try to abandon Schedule 3 in lieu of remaining Schedule 1. I think 3 is better than 1. We get
Mhm.
280 relief. It's a step towards normalization. And for me, any step towards normalization is a win.
Well, and then that's the thing. It's Congress versus the executive branch. And so the executive branch is hamstrung by what Congress passed in 1970. And so the only, and then I don't understand all these people that give Trump credit because he signed the Farm Bill, thinking that that hemp can't get you high. However, they give no credit to Joe Biden, who literally rescheduled or directed them to reschedule, which is the maximum extent that an executive can do to deschedule the plant under the Controlled Substances Act, which Congress passed in 1970. I'm all for the what Ron Wyden's put out if they add marijuana to the definition of cannabis, and we just get past this canard where the point, in my opinion, like why it's zero point 0.3. What's the point of the 0.3% delta 9 THC? Well, why did they make that line?
Yeah, so let me back up, and there was a couple points there. Your comments about the executive branch versus Congress. I don't know how you're going to handle this comment, but I agree with you.
It's
For
literally in the
oh,
law.
yeah,
Section
we're
811 of the Controlled Substances Act. Yeah.
yeah, and in regards to people's interpretation of who's done what and who's going to do what, we're very aligned right there. So you're not going to hear any debate from me on those points whatsoever. The point three is arbitrary, completely arbitrary. We know it's arbitrary. The individual that wrote the study that first mentioned point three has said this is completely arbitrary. And what they were really looking for was type 3, type 4 cultivars, more or less, to be approved. And those
Mhm.
cultivars, even fiber and grain, do have THC in them, and some of those cultivars way more than point 0.3. We've got Chinese varietals that are not uncommon, that produce really great grain that is going to hit 5%. And so, we still have to watch what cultivars we can allow and what cultivars we don't allow in those programs. But, arguably the law was written to focus on primarily industrial hemp, which would be for textiles, fibers, plastics, that sort of thing. However, keep in mind that 2014 through 2018 was that time period where they were really trying to prove, can we get this crop in our country and stop importing as much of these textiles and fibers and foods as we can. During that time, CBD exploded. It totally exploded. And so by the time the 2018 Farm Bill came around, they removed the word industrial from the act for a reason. They knew that CBD was the market value, and they knew that full spectrum products were on the market and being successful. No one was upset about THC from hemp when they were selling 60 milligrams in a tincture at a time. No one cared. No one said a word about it. As soon as it was spotlighted and someone started saying, hey, there's THC in here, why don't we advertise that and talk about it and sell that product? Then everyone started losing their mind as if it was some new concept, despite the fact that it had been around for 4 years before 2018, for multiple years after 2018, before we'll say the Delta 9 craze really took off.
Yeah, that's what I would say the reason behind the zero point 0.3 delta 9 THC was so that it doesn't get you high. That's why they had that there. So that you can't just use it for psychoactive purposes. Otherwise, then it would be marijuana. And so that's what I'm pretty sure all the legislatures agreed. And that's why it was so easy to pass. The laws to try to reschedule, deschedule, move cannabis, even normalize it for banking purposes, have all failed because of Republicans in the Senate and the way the filibuster works. Uh, all of them. And then whenever, like here in Illinois, we didn't fight hard to get hemp passed. We didn't have to. That wasn't the point. We fought really hard to get marijuana legalized or at least regulated so that its business could be a privilege in our state and it would not be criminalized with possession limits and stuff like that. However, that was a strict party line vote, and it was the first state to legislatively do it, and it was just in 2019. And I think it was because that stuff can get you high. And that was how they really understood these two versions of the same plant. Gets you high, doesn't get you high. And then, of course, they don't understand what they're regulating because, 1 in 5 people probably likes the plant. 4 out of 5 people, they don't care what you're talking about.
Yeah, agreed with some of that. And we keep going back to what did the original authors intend? What did the initial politicians who voted yes, what did they intend? And there's arguments and good reasons to talk about those things. So I don't want to devalue the point that you're making. But I will say that trying to understand what the intent of everyone that signed yes is not possible. And with Ron Wyden blatantly coming out with language saying we need to codify this, this is fine, this is acceptable, you could likely conclude that he was of the same mindset right off the bat. And furthermore, while the 0.3%, even if, let's say you're 100% correct, which I don't believe you are, but we can disagree there. Let's say you are 100% correct, and the original authors had no intent of ever allowing any form of THC to hit final product form. They could have written that. They could have written that in the law, and they
Well,
didn't. And in number
that's how
two,
the Farm Bill works. The Farm Bill doesn't define finished products, it defines agricultural commodities. To the extent that they have used the definition of an agricultural commodity, like number 2 yellow corn, to mean all these other finished products,
yeah,
there's no federal law to support it.
while generally true, we just saw the Mary Miller amendment added to the House version, which was not germane in that regard because it does quantify finished goods and it made it through. So I won't say it's impossible to have done because there's an attempt to do it right now. And if all of those lobbyists and all of those legislators that let this get to where it's at didn't believe it ever had legs past where it is now, they wouldn't have spent the money and the time getting it to where it is. So I think it's possible, though not germane, and that's factual. And I think that the not germane argument is going to be a real win for dismantling the Mary Miller Amendment. But regardless of intent, if we're only looking at intent, the intent of it being illegal in the first place is something that I don't agree with, and I don't think you agree with either, right? So if we don't
Well, I'm talking
agree
about
with,
legalizing marijuana. I'm not in favor of this whole like hemp gets you high thing. I'm in favor of like hemp being regulated in a different fashion because if you go to Costco to buy those hemp hearts, they're still from Lithuania. That was the point of the Farm Bill, so that we
yeah,
could have American grown hemp hearts, foods, not just that, shirts, building materials, other stuff, which turned out to be real hard, real capital intensive, and much harder to do than to try to grow the plant for its botanical purposes of its cannabinoid content.
agreed. And that's why that market's still suffering. In fact, I was the policy co-chair of NIHC for years, and the National Industrial Hemp Council focused primarily on the industrial hemp side of things. So my activism isn't solely on getting people high. My activism is definitely on THC and CBD, but just as much on the other side of the plant as well. And I've got to a point in my life where I've ran out of time to balance all the plates I'm balancing. And I'm not as knowledgeable in that space as some of my compatriots were that were on that same committee. And so it got to a point where it was taking a lot of time, but I wasn't bringing a lot of value anymore. But I spent a significant amount of my personal time advocating for fiber and grain, working with farmers. I mean, hell, my first entrance into the space was Hemp Exchange, which was a marketplace solely for the movement of biomass, fiber, and these sorts of commodities. And we worked with pretty much every licensed farm in the country at the time in 2019 was on the
So you were
platform,
helping with the
or
spot price of biomass and distillate.
at the time was trying to. Yeah, I'm not so much involved in that anymore, obviously, but we're trying to
Do you,
stabilize it and be a little transparent about it.
did you have involvement through 21?
No, no,
Okay.
we parted ways with that marketplace after before 21.
'Cause that's what our 2019 CBD hemp. We're going to do all this CBD. It's going to be in everything. People are going to love it. Put it
Family
in
Video is
bath
selling
bombs.
Family Video is
CBD
selling
everywhere.
CBD. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And then the price of the distillate just dropped. And so they're
yep.
like, oh crap, we're not going to make any money. CBG, other lesser cannabinoids started to pop up in so 19 into 20, that crop
Yeah,
year,
we
you saw
we
less
had a bunch of
people.
CBG on the platform. That was kind of right around the time where we shut that program down, but CBG had just become a thing. We just got a first couple of real crops of CBG flower and biomass had been created. And at the time, everyone thought it was going to explode. This is going to be the coolest thing. CBG is so much better than everything else. There's so much potential with CBGA. This is going to be a hot commodity. And prices for isolate and distillate and even mother liquor for this stuff or crude for this stuff was insane for a while. But
Mhm.
it's trying to build something that you hope will sell without finding product market fit first. And lo and behold, the entire country wasn't looking for a CBG solution. So it still exists. You know, people still use CBG in products, and I encourage them to do so. I think there's a lot of medical
Mhm.
benefits there, but it's not the market that we thought it was. Just like CBD is not the market we thought it was.
Right. And so then we get into like 21, where now the market has supplies up here and demands down here. And they go, you know what we can do? It says Delta 9 THC over there because they don't want you to get high, in my estimation. Because if you look at the agricultural commodity, the only thing that gets you high is that Delta 9. And so even in Illinois, we defined cannabis to also include CBN, but not
Mhm.
CBD. And so, like, CBN gets you a little high, more like sleepy than
Yeah.
psychoactive. And they still said that's too far. That's going to make it marijuana or cannabis that you need a license to sell. But they didn't do that for CBD because that's where the hemp was. Now, do you know why they didn't include Delta 8 THC in the calculation of total THC in the Farm Bill's final rule for setting like the harvest and the calculations of total THC?
I mean, I'd be guessing, right? Because I wasn't
Okay.
in the room for those discussions. My
Well,
assumption
it
is that it wasn't added because it was such a minuscule amount of the plant that it's the same reason Amanita muscaria isn't really a controlled substance. It's the value to market is minimal to the point where it's insignificant.
that was before they started making it into chocolates. But to
Agreed.
the Delta 8 point, it's literally referenced and discussed in the final rule as to their decision about
Hmm.
the calculation of total THC. We would have included, but our instruments can't test for it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't included. I'm sure that's one of those things where it also illustrates the intention of the regulators and the intention of Congress to think that we are looking at a crop. We are not looking at semi-synthetic derivatives of a product that was the agricultural commodity, whether it's mother liquor or you've put it into the isolate form of the CBD or the CBG, those types of, more commodity versions, and then becoming something else, something that is psychoactive. So I think that's really uh, the history of it, the legislative record, because they don't just pass these bills in a vacuum; they debate them, and that's one of the reasons why they voted for it, because they all were led to believe it didn't get you high. And then that's one of the reasons why they didn't test for Delta 8 THC for the total THC, because you can't test for it. And then just start, because in 2020, 2021, Delta 8 THC breaks out big time because it's technically hemp, because it says Delta 8, not Delta 9. And so this is where you get into the absurd reading of the literal rule. There's no way that Congress intended to legalize a semi-synthetic version of the psychoactive chemical in cannabis. That's why we set up this hemp program like this, so that I can go to Costco and my hemp hearts aren't made in Lithuania, they're made in Oregon.
Have
But I still can't buy the hemp hearts in Oregon.
have any legislators besides Senator Wyden said anything about this, like made any statement? Like, because Chris, you sort of made the argument earlier that Senator Wyden is following up with this. This is like a statement almost. I wanted to ask, like, has anybody said like, "Hey, this isn't what we intended," or "This is way out of whack"?
I've had some closed conversations with either lawyers that were working in that effort or wrote some of the draft rules. that made it clear to me that this was a known thing by a lot of the initial drafters, that the THC allowance could be manipulated, and they were okay with that. That it wasn't a problem. That wasn't enough. The scare tactic of, oh my God, people might find a loophole here and get high, wasn't a reason to not try to promote industrial hemp being domestically produced. And I tend to agree with that. I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. And furthermore, I think we can sit here and talk for the next hour and a half about the intent or what was supposed to be or how they ended up there. At the end of the day, the intent is that marijuana is illegal. That's what they want, right? That's what Congress wants right now. That's what is on the books. This is the 1970 legislative act that you're talking about. I don't believe that intent has merit or value. So to re-argue the intent isn't to get high, my rebuttal is the intent is they don't want anyone to get high for any reason, and I'm diametrically opposed to that. So if there's a little daylight for wiggle room to give people access to the thing they, as far as I'm concerned, it's their God-given right to have access to, why would I want to stifle that? Why would I want to put that back in the box and say, no, 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 let's recriminalize this? It's totally backwards on progress. And to Thomas's points about it doesn't, like, the Wyden Act doesn't go far enough, I'm actually in support of that. If a bill came out that said, hey, we're just gonna, it's exactly the same, but we're gonna remove this 0.3 part, right? I'd be like, great, let's get that bill across the board. But the political capital to get that done is not there yet, which is why it hasn't happened to date. On top of that, there's actual marijuana lobbyists that have been actively fighting against these sorts of things like interstate commerce and legalization. There's a reason that there's $60 million spent in a Florida initiative and only $6 million spent federally last year combined, right? Not a lot of, that's hyperbole. There are some MSOs out there that don't actually want legalization because it's not conducive to their long-term plan. And we can argue those merits all day, regardless. The lobbying records are there. But the point is, if we actually want legalization, and we do, I fully support marijuana legalization. I don't think it should be on a Controlled Substance Act. I think further, you should be able to walk into the gas station and buy clean, compliant flower and take it home and smoke it. I don't think there's any problem with that. I think the dispensary system is broken. It's showing that this is such a dangerous thing and has to be super isolated to this one type of store, and it's got to be zoned way out in the middle of nowhere, and
They
all these
do that
different
with liquor
problems that come with
stores.
it.
I mean, if are you in Washington State? Where are you,
No,
Chris?
I did live in Washington. I'm in Denver now. I've lived in states that
Okay.
had government-controlled liquor stores, and
Right.
I also don't agree with those. I think it's a silly concept, and the liquor markets suffer in those states because of lack of access. And I
Well,
think at the
it's
end of the day, if
still,
cannabis
it's
is
all
to
the
be
licenses.
normalized, it needs to
Yeah.
actually be normalized. And normalization includes I'm going to go to the store, buy my groceries for the week, buy a fifth of whiskey and some
Right.
cannabis products.
Again, but we got to talk to the 80% of people that aren't us if we're going to get any if we're going to get this legalized, and I'll talk about the semi-synthetics later because like oxycodone's a semi-synthetic opioid. And I don't think we should like try to get into that can of worms and have that be more legal than the natural product. I think we know the natural product. That should be the default. Um, but you're going to have a system of license holders, just like you have had for decades in alcohol. We have the three-tiered system. We have the producers, we have the retailers, and we have the distribution. And so the retailer licenses are different types. There's you can go to the liquor store where you're not allowed to just sit there and start drinking it. And then they have a different license for more of a retail location, which
Sure.
they'll pour you the beer. And so I still think that we need to have a comprehensive system where if you're going to go to that gas station to buy it, it needs to have the retail license. And then if you're going to go to that consumption lounge to enjoy it, they need to have a different license. And so then now we have those three systems where we have the
Agreed.
producers. And we're talking about this product it's very similar to alcohol because alcohol was medicinal during prohibition or religious. And so there is and everybody, like one of the things that the hemp people will mention is like, we are fighting for access, for safe access, for the people to have access to this plant. And they completely skip over, there's no regulation, there's no testing that's actually in it to like what type of purity they're going to have and all that. But we're talking about a substance that has for decades, millennia, medicinal purposes, and that you eat, that you take into your system like it is a food. The FDA needs to be all over this, regulating it like it does spinach or like it does, to a certain extent, they don't necessarily get into alcohol, but there's a different regulator for alcohol and what can be in it. Like if you look at the definition of bourbon that you bought at that grocery store, there's a definition on federal law, and there is a
Sure.
tax on that. And so
Yep.
I think if people want to get behind the Cannabinoid Safety and Regulation Act, I'm all for it. But I think you need to put those systems in place. They really only talked about the producing. They didn't talk about the retail. And so I think we need to have those retailers taken care of, and marijuana needs to be in there so that we could, like, there's no way that THCP should be peddled unregulated. No way. It's like 20 times stronger than Delta 9.
I'm in full agreement there. I'm in agreement about the different types of licensing. I think that's common sense, right? If you want to sell a product in your restaurant that is going to impair someone, you need a license to do that and some form of regulatory enforcement to ensure there's no overconsumption, that people are being safe. I don't think most of the hemp industry is opposed to these things. There is a niche within our space that are pure cowboys that don't want any regulation. They don't want the FDA involved. They don't want TTB involved. They just want to keep doing whatever they want to do. Those folks are shunned within the hemp industry proper. And unfortunately, they're very loud. So if you're an external observer of the industry, it seems like that's a large representation of the folks in the space. And it really isn't. Having been here as long as I've been and involved in as many trade associations and been to so many conferences and spoken on so many panels, it's rare that I actually run into one of these people anymore
Well, and
because
Chris,
most of them have been pushed out of the space.
if I could, this is something Tom and I have discussed on the show in the past, and like Tom, I recall your response, so I can like say it again, but I figure you'll know it. The some of the hemp growers have said in Illinois, just to make this Illinois specific, we want to comply with the same testing regulations as the cannabis operators do, right? And Tom, your response to that, if I recall correctly, was like, but that's not really good enough type.
That's right. That's right.
So let's get into that, because I feel like this is, we've gotten kind of past intent and now we're getting into like, how should this be regulated? How should this be sold? And I feel like that's a major difference in opinion right there, Tom. But can you unpack that?
Sure. And so we have two laws that have been brought into Illinois. And there's public health considerations, and then there's all sorts of other legal principles that we have, because these two laws should be read in a way that harmonizes them. And so the Hemp Act is not supposed to be the marijuana or the Cannabis Act that gets you high. That because of their arrest and the criminalization of marijuana for decades in America, well, in Illinois and in America at large, created disproportionately impacted areas that were blighted. And so the state created this comprehensive scheme that would license retail outlets so that they could track the entire supply chain and control that supply, just like they do with the casino dollars in Vegas. So instead of casino dollars, they look at marijuana money dollars, and they want to make sure that there's no diversion of these dollars so that they can be sure that the supply has been taxed. And then those taxes go back to the communities. And like 3% is what my community gets, and all the other communities, they don't get that tax. The community doesn't get that when you go down to the smoke shop, which there's dozens, if not tens of thousands of them in our state selling regular, and then it gets into the harmonization of the statutes. So I can go buy a 7.5 gram vape with, it was called Pegasus Delta 8, which doesn't exist. I don't even know what that is. And then like, THC-JD, it's the lesser cannabinoid that they made in a lab with a law degree, but it's essentially just trying to mimic Delta-9. All of these things. Now we have like, public health involved, but the regulation for the dosage of vapes and the tax level for the dosage of vapes was set in the CRTA, not in the Illinois Hemp Act. And then you get into the edibles, which, this will be interesting. Chris was educating me as to dry weight basis as to beverages. But those types of safety protocols that were put into place on the operators don't exist if you just do the testing. And then the taxes don't exist if you just do that. And then the security doesn't exist if you just do that. So you're talking about regulatory, and actually it's not, this is beyond the ability of regulators to do. Now you're talking about getting the General Assembly in Springfield to create legislative change to harmonize these two statutes. One, which was clearly designed for helping people make shirts, building materials, and hemp hearts in Costco. And the other one, which was clearly designed for people who wanted to consume this product as it has been done for thousands of years, medicinally or recreationally, through taking it into their body as if it is a foodstuff.
So, but Tom, I think I get your point. I want to nail this down. So again, they said they'd agree to testing, so that checks the public health box. They said there is a proposal out there that said they'd agree to the same taxes, so that checks the R3 box, right? The reinvesting in the communities. But your point, if I understand it correctly, is that it's like the regulations before that they're skipping out on. And I've heard this
What
from
about the
other
inventory
operators.
control? What about the inventory control? Are they going to comply with inventory control? Are they going to
Right.
buy their products from other licensed operators in state? Are they going to have their products shipped to them through licensed transporters?
And so my question is, and I think this piggybacks off of something Chris said earlier, is like you have valid points here, but it's like, why not take those? I almost view what hemp has done by skipping some of those processes as like a win. Like we're over regulating cannabis. So like, why not take like the good and then leave the bad type of
That's
thing?
not how law works. And so, like, you're talking about two regulatory schemes. One is like fingernail clippings. Like, go read the Illinois Hemp Act. It is 3 pages long. And the other one is the Illinois Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. And it is a bazillion million
500
pages
page.
long.
Yeah, something like that.
Right. And so if you want hemp to be cannabis, you can't unless you legislatively create the same type of comprehensive regulatory regime that you've created. Who's the regulator for the hemp people that want to just completely skip the line and sell it at every corner drugstore as if they have a license to do so?
Well, in Illinois, isn't it the same one, at least one of the same regulators, David Lakeman?
David, that is okay. That is for hemp production.
Okay.
There is no regulation for hemp consumption. There's no regulation for, I mean, they do have pesticide regulation that you're not allowed, but they only test for concentration of cannabinoid. They don't test for any of those pesticides on your product. That is not according to the rules. And so
Yeah.
they have, if they want them to be the same, they need regulatory, I shouldn't say regulatory, they need legislative change to put them together. And I'm all for it. I don't want to go spend, $75,000 on a wire mesh vault because I have to, because the rules say I have to. I don't want to go spend $70,000 on a bazillion million cameras because I have to, because they say I have to. And then those doors, there are specific types of doors. And like, so a dispensary is not as much a dispensary as it is like the safe room in the casino, the counting room in the casino where the pit boss is just like sitting there with a cigar, making sure the money comes in. Or it's like your bank that you go and you visit because people might rob that too. And so
Right.
that robbery risk is one of the reasons why we have such security compliance. And the security compliance sections of the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act simply do not exist in the Hemp Act. And so you can't have them be the same. And it's not a win. It is actually hamstringing. And again, like 2%, that's it. That's the extent that you can control the Illinois cannabis market when it is fully extended.
Sure.
500 cannabis dispensaries, you're allowed 10. And then there's another 110 dispensaries in the state, which are called early adult use access ones that don't count toward the 500 cap.
Well,
So we're really only 610 licenses, and you can only own 10. So it's less than 2% is it
right.
would be dominant. Yeah.
And actually, not to get into that too much, but that's one of the license caps I am supportive of. But to flip it back to what like we were just talking about, I like the ownership caps so that you kind of do prevent anybody from getting larger than another
But I know
person.
a guy that owns like 15 smoke
And
shops,
I
smoke
think
expresses,
that's right.
no
I think
caps.
that's
Yeah.
something from cannabis that should come into hemp. Like it's actually, I think hemp, that's one of the things I do not like about hemp is that there's no protection against monopolies or oligopolies. But anyways, I just kind of want to get back to this point because it's like, I feel like like, I want to give you the space here because you jokingly said earlier at the start of the show that people call you a monopolist, and I see you on LinkedIn sometimes, and it's
Mhm.
like on one hand you agree with me in theory. I think like it's cool to get this sent through the mail. Like we could never do this before now. Like it's so cool. I
Mhm.
think you agree with me, like, and you understand because you are a cannabis consumer, like where I'm coming from. But on the other hand, like I think a lot of people do see you as somebody that's defending these systems when I don't think that's actually true. Like when if I were to sit down with you and talk about how cool some of these hemp things are. And so I
Right,
want to
but
give you this
less
space on
than
that because like I don't
1%, less than 1% of the population's a lawyer. Right. And so they aren't going to, the 99% of the population is not going to look through it from the lens that a lawyer is going to look through it. And so when I do that and I'm looking through it through my lens because I'm an attorney, I see it and I'm like, this is a legislative fix. This is just Captain Cuckoo Bananas. This makes no sense. Why would they pass both of these laws at the same time? If this one's just going to front run the other one, you're just going to suppress this one because I mean, and that's one of the reasons why I think they built in limited licenses was not for protecting some type of monopoly, but because they knew they were going to regulate the crap out of them. And so if they regulate the crap out of them and it costs $1.5 million to get operational, they wanted to make sure that the dispensary didn't then immediately close down. And they were trying to provide safe, reliable access of natural cannabis products that were tested and dosed appropriately to the people. And I don't see that with hemp.
Well,
yeah,
there are multiple states that do have proper regulations and legislation for hemp.
Yep.
And most of that, not all of it, some of it has been reactive by the hemp industry. A bad bill gets introduced and we go, oh my God, we need to get involved. And we're able to negotiate for a positive bill. But a lot of
Mm-hmm.
it is started by the hemp industry saying there's no regulations or legislation to support this. It's currently you're not saying you can't, so you can, but there's no legislative guardrails, there's no consumer
Mm-hmm.
safety, et cetera. And a lot of us have gone in and created those bills and lobbied for sponsors to create these guardrails. And I think what hemp is trying to do, most of hemp players are trying to do, is show what cannabis access could look like. We can still protect the consumer. We can still provide safe products. We can still provide them in ways that adults want to use them for their own reasoning. And we can do so without some of these, quite honestly, insane and arbitrary onerous regulations and legislative components that exist in most of the state in marijuana industries right now. And those onerous rules, laws and rules are constricting, significantly constricting the market and making it really difficult and almost incentivizing, like if unless you have massive amount of coffers, you can't pull this off. And like you just said, because they're going to regulate the crap out of it. And I don't think that's what most cannabis activists want to see is this significant overregulation. So, I did a presentation for a trade association in Washington State, a marijuana trade association. And I asked the group, I said, why didn't you guys try to leverage the hemp problem as a solution to lighten your onerous regulations and consolidate into something that's more reasonable, where you're still paying tax, but it's not 50% effective tax. You're still making sure that you've got recall tracking, COAs, all the things that are important. but you're not constricted by this. Well, I planted this seed, and so now I've got to RFID it until it makes it into the mouth of a consumer. Like some of this stuff is just blatantly ridiculous and the antithesis of normalization. And so my hope is that in a lot of these states, you can see a better pathway. And the hope was always that marijuana activists would use that leverage to argue themselves into a better position, of which the hemp trade associations have tried multiple times to reach out to the marijuana trade associations to say, we'll help you in that fight because we don't support what's happening to you. And I think a lot of marijuana folks look at the hemp industry as being anti-marijuana. We're not. Most of us are very, very pro-marijuana. We're pro-descheduling. We're pro these markets. And most of us would like to see a consolidated, uniformed legislative package regardless of source. I can't get legislators. The trade associations I'm with have not yet been able to get legislators to get behind this. They see marijuana as a cash cow, right? And it's solely as a cash cow. And looking at it that way is stifling industry, it's stifling growth, and it's stifling innovation, it's stifling access, it's stifling normalization. And
It's not just the legislators. Everybody sees it like that. I've never seen a perceived wealth problem worse than marijuana, in the sense that if the what you I try to like do the real estate transactions through land trusts. Like, why are you buying this? I don't know. I just like how it looks. Because if they find out,
it's the green tax.
what it's for, it's the green tax. Hemp doesn't get green taxed, and so that kind of is annoying. But then
we do a little bit, nowhere near to the extent of marijuana.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try to pretend we do, but there's still a green tax in hemp. We have banking, but we pay more
Right.
for it. We have credit card processing, we pay more for it. Our insurance is significantly higher than if we were selling alcohol, even.
But less
so there's
than
still
marijuana.
a green tax, but it's significantly more reasonable.
Right. Well, I mean, I did want to I am for when they make sense. And so if I see something that doesn't make any sense, and right now, Schedule 1 marijuana doesn't make sense. I think it's unconstitutional, totally bananas. Schedule 3 marijuana, I can't make that argument near as well, because so many people use that plant, especially when it comes to using the cannabis flowers, the cannabinoids for themselves, taking it into their bodies medicinally. They do. So to say that that's not a medicinal plant that should be regulated like other drugs are is a little disingenuous. But I wanted to give a shout out to Minnesota. Minnesota, they codified. And when you codify it, you can, and I guess this is a nice little dovetail into the dry weight basis quagmire that's out there right now. They codified the hemp extract, and they said you can do beverages and you can do gummies, but there's a 5 milligram unit that you have to stick to, and 50 milligrams per container, which is the exact same that we have for the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act in Illinois, except ours for adult use is 10 milligrams per unit and 100 milligrams per container. Now, we were talking earlier offline as to, well, how does this work with seltzers? Because I wish that I had one of those 25 milligram seltzers right here, and I could turn it around and say 0 calories. Is that a seltzer or is that soda? I don't
This
know
is
if
a
you're
soda. Sorry.
How many grams of sugar's in it?
Let's see.
Because then we can do math pretty easily.
22 grams.
Well, there you go. 22 grams of sugar, of course, is, let me just pull this up, because now I'm going to do 22 times 1,000. So it's 22,000 milligrams. And then we can multiply that by 0.003, 0.003.
Yep.
66 milligrams of THC could be, suspended in that to hit the 0.3, which is bananas. A 66 milligram soda, that's really strong, and that could be considered compliant. So one of the things that with the hemp, you don't have this, and so you need that type of regulation. They codified it in Minnesota, so that could be, there it is, gelatin, corn syrup, right. But I like how they did it in Minnesota. And so if the Illinois hemp people want to get behind something like this, I don't think they would if it meant that their license couldn't be got for $25 and available at like no setback requirements from churches or schools or other dispensing organizations. I think they want to say they want regulations more than they actually want regulations, because then they could say they're offering something. You know,
I mean, that'd be true if we didn't have factual evidence that hemp industry has lobbied for regulations and got them in multiple states. So
they
there's a
shut it down in Illinois. Like there's a couple of bills in Illinois, and all the hemp peddlers, and there's like 10,000 of them in the state, they didn't want the regulation. And so they didn't vote for it. They
well, there
shut it
may be
down.
specific components in a piece of legislation or a bill that is unagreeable. And I think that something we've done, and I'm not throwing shade at marijuana companies or lobbyists or legislation that have passed this, but the reason things are so onerous in marijuana is a lot of these concessions, right? No like a Green Triangle grower or legacy grower in California thought track and trace was a good idea, right? No one was like, this is what we need to protect consumers. It was a concession to get the reefer madness, we'll say, older population in Congress that are out of touch to accept, okay, fine, if we can control the shit out of it, we'll let it happen.
Well, that's what
Those,
it was. It had nothing to do. Like
right.
it
So
had
those
everything
concessions
to do
had to be
with
made.
right.
Those concessions had to be made to get some programs off the ground. The
It was
problem we're seeing now,
anti-diversion.
like you said, is once those concessions are made, it's really hard to walk them back and be like, hey, we don't need this amount of overregulation anymore. And so what the hemp industry is doing now is trying to not fall in the same problem and say, hey, if there's a really bad component to this bill, we're not going to want to codify this and then try to fight it for the next 10 years. Let's just shut it down now and get a bill out there that we do support. And so, and we're seeing this in lots of states. You know, Minnesota, I would have liked to have seen, this is going to maybe not offend you, but blow your mind a little bit. I'd rather see hemp in Minnesota at 10 and 100, but I'd rather see marijuana at 100 and 1,000. Because why does this matter? In practical terms, why does the amount that you can purchase in a serving or a container, why does it actually matter at the end of the day, other than some form of artificial idea that there's a control here and you're trying to throttle the amount of consumption people can have, despite the fact that they can go buy 10 containers or they could buy 8 grams of concentrate and smoke it all per day, and that seems to be okay, but you certainly can't eat that many gummies for whatever stupid reason. I don't think in the grand scheme of things, milligram caps should exist at all. I understand the reason for them to exist now, and I think they should be significantly higher than they are. And I think if you came out to the hemp industry and said, hey, in Illinois, we're going to create a uniform bill that gets rid of the onerous ridiculousness, harmonizes both industries. If it's a hemp product, it's got to be 10 and 100. If it's a marijuana product, it could be 100 and 1,000. You'd have full hemp support on that. I don't think we'd see any detractors really. And this
Well,
is I'm trying. This is what I
what
would like
about
to
the
see.
retail end of it? And so like,
So
okay, with the hemp end, okay, let's say they're going to grow that product and manufacture that with the dosages slightly different, or let's say the dosages are the same. Do they have to follow the same regulations to manufacture the product that the cannabis the cannabis license holder has to?
I think what's required there is the littlest amount of regulations that provide for consumer safety. And to my answer to that is always yes. Hemp should be held to those standards. Marijuana should be held to those standards. I
So
don't
every
think
hemp
taking,
operator needs a recall policy. And so like,
yes,
show me your
yes,
recall policy
yep.
pursuant to, you see, then if we're going to, and I'm all for it, if we regulate, if there's one set of rules for the intoxicating and the psychoactive usage of this plant or the medicinal usage of this plant, and considering like, type 3 cultivars as well that are being used medicinally. And so you want people to have safe, good supply. So what they say is on it is on it.
Yeah,
And we
agreed.
just don't have that with hemp right now. And we have a lot of cowboys, and like I see a lot of God, they
Well,
would call me
again,
all
you
the
can't
time.
say we don't have it.
Yeah.
We don't have it at a federal level. That's absolutely true.
Right.
But we don't have this for marijuana at a federal level either. So samesies,
No.
right?
Right.
We do have this in some states, but not all states. Marijuana has it in some states, but not all states, right? Because in some states it's still completely illegal. So there's no legislation or consumer protection. It's all legacy market. These do exist in some states. Some states have requirements for consumer safety, truth in labeling, and they're doing shelf checks where they're pulling product off shelves, they're testing them, and if you're out of compliance, product's getting pulled. And
Missouri.
those of us in the hemp space that are supportive of what we're doing and not just trying to make money, but trying to push activism as well as access and normalization. We support those things and are inherently self-regulating. In fact, I'm proud to say that as president of the USHA, the U.S. Hemp Authority, we just unleashed a adult use certification program, and I'm actively encouraging people to go through this audit and get certified because you essentially have to be running GMP. You have to do
Right.
mock calls. And this is, I'm very passionate that this is required for safe product. And so when I say I support consumer safety legislation, these are the things I'm talking about. There's a reason that this exists. If you want to make cookies, you have to follow these rules. Why? Because someone's putting it in their body, and we should
Mm-hmm.
maintain these. Should we have to have a certain kind of door and 17 cameras? No. And the only
No,
reason those rules exist right now is because there's so much cash laying around. It's not that marijuana specifically is a high profile target for theft. It's the cash that is sitting there that is high profile for theft. And if
it's
two way,
cash, but then it's a fungible commodity in the sense that if I'm going to go rob somebody of $1,000 worth of alcohol, that's a harder
it's
getaway.
harder to
I'm going
move.
to be, yeah, it's
It's
harder for
harder
me
to
to move.
move.
I'm going to go rob a
Yep.
$1,000 of weed. It's light, and so that
You fit it in your
also.
Gencos.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that people are like robbing jewelry stores all the time. And so if you can allow, that gets back to safe banking in Schedule 3. So you take marijuana into Schedule 3 and you allow banking for it, a lot of those security requirements, then I can go to the regulators and I can say like, hey, or the legislatures and say, we need, because they codified a lot of the security that we have to comply with. And so then we could start attacking it. But of course, we already have sunk costs. And then how much of that sunk cost do we still owe to the bank? And so there's that aspect of it as well. And so it's a difficult problem, but I really hope that this Schedule 3 hearing that we have a month after the election on December 2nd, they need, and the DEA is supposed to be in on the production side with the hemp, making sure that it is tested compliant. So I would like to see this get fixed in a model rule, how we did the model rule for USDA on the production side. Hopefully this DEA is more on the end consumer side, where it says, this is a dispensary. This is what you need. Ideally, Congress doesn't want to make the law. So
Yep.
they're putting it onto the administration to make the law. And so the DEA has been fighting this for decades. They don't want
Right.
to write it. So it's probably getting written by the Office of Legal Counsel to the president. And then if that switches, and now we have the 2025 guys in because Donald Trump can't keep a friend. That's just kind of how he is. And so those people that he's going to put in may be really, really hostile or sympathetic to the DEA trying to keep in Schedule 1 and just put the kibosh on everything. And so I'm kind of worried about how this is all going to roll out. But if the administration continues or slightly changes, and we can get a comprehensive rules for like, here's how you farm it, here's how you sell it, that's like the first iteration that could then get distilled and then into some legislation that can remove it entirely from the scheduling, because like they have to regulate it some way. And the bills that they've put forward so far in Congress, they either have a bazillion million taxes
Yep.
or no taxes. And they like the Wyden's most recent bill, the Cannabinoid Regulation and Safety Act, just leave marijuana in the lurch. And so that's not going to fix anything. It's just a little silly. It's codifying the silly as opposed to codifying the plant and allowing for its commerce. Because why on earth would you have this like, hey, let's go make some cannabis that gets you high, but it can't have any THC in it, so we have to cook it up in the lab? Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that to yourself? So I really, but then like we're talking to activists. We aren't talking to. We're inside the tent. Everybody else is outside of the tent. 4 out of 5 people outside the tent. It has to make sense to them. And so if we could get some type of regulatory regime for here's the rules for this industry, and Congress doesn't want to do it. So if the administration gets it done and then it's there, then maybe Congress will be like, okay, well, it's working. Let's finally take care of this and drop it out, and then we can get to the taxes, because you can't tax drugs aren't taxed. Like all that fentanyl, and it's untaxed, and it's a legitimate drug. Of course, it has huge illicit usage.
I mean, a lot of the points you just made, I don't disagree with. And again, coming into this, I assume that despite us being, we'll say, civilly heated on LinkedIn at times, I really think that there's a 5% ideological difference, and 95% we're probably actually in agreement for. I don't think that
Well,
new
didn't your
cannabinoids
guys'
should.
stuff? Yeah, didn't your guys' new stuff? Didn't it just say Delta 9, Delta 8? That's it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's because there's not enough data behind the other products to put a stamp of quality on it. Like, what does quality THCP mean? And is there such a thing? What is quality THCJD? And is there such a thing? The data is not there to support those things. And as such, it's really difficult to try to quantify that in a standard and then certify it if we don't actually know if this stuff is all safe. And so Delta 8's a lot easier. Yes, it's a minuscule part of the plant, but there are studies out there. The molecule is generally safer than Delta 9 if you get a pure, clean molecule without a bunch of other crap in there. And so that's why we put in a standard for if it's semi-synthetic, you must have purity standards and we must know what's in there. And we need to know the catalyst of what chemical you use to create this conversion. And we need to see a COA that says you've tested for it and it's not in there, right? There's all these different things that we can put in place to attempt to do what the federal regulations or state regulations are lacking in right now. And
Mhm.
so, all in all, again, I think we're really aligned on a lot of these things, and we're just ideologically predisposed to our own fallacies. And I see this as an activism push towards normalization. It's another step in the right direction. When you live in Alabama or Georgia and you can walk into a bar and get a THC drink, that is massive improvement from where we were 15 years ago. I mean, mind-blowing improvement in cannabis normalization. And so I see that as a win. Is there
Right.
more to be done? Absolutely there is. Is marijuana being treated fairly? Absolutely they're not. And I don't support that. And in my perfect world, a smart state would figure it out and say, hey, let's strip back these crazy rules and these crazy taxes. Let's limit the regulatory body to just what's necessary for consumer safety, and let's normalize this stuff. And to your point on the sunken costs, I mean, that is a known logical fallacy, sunken cost fallacy. You can't keep going in the wrong direction just because you've lost a bunch of money or poured a bunch of money into it already. You need to make the next best decision. And for all the marijuana companies that are like, well, it's not fair, cool. Start a hemp company as well. Hedge your bets. It's inexpensive, comparatively speaking. It's not free. It's, in states with regulations, you have licensing, you have compliance that you need to follow, but play on both sides of the fence. And we're seeing more and more marijuana companies, large companies, embracing this concept because they're catching on to this idea of, I can't complain it's not fair when I'm actually still able to do that. I can't sell marijuana. I can't take, converted, 80% Delta 9 concentrate and then sell that. Like, that's blatantly not allowed. You're not
I
going to
don't
get.
understand the THCA vapes. Can you explain THCA vapes to me? Because I thought THCA was a crystalline substance. And then, of course, if you use it as directed, it becomes marijuana.
Yes. So, you're absolutely right on both of those fronts, right? And this is where I have personally chosen not to engage in the THCA market. The activist in me loves this idea. Yeah, fuck it. Let's get this plant to the people, right? They shouldn't be restricted from having it. However, it is a more, as the guy that did Delta 9 in the first place from hemp, I will say THCA is a riskier endeavor further down the gray, closer to the black than I'm personally comfortable with engaging in. The activist in me loves it. The businessman in me is like, we're not touching it. And I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't, if the Farm Bill removes this opportunity for THCA. I wouldn't be surprised if it sticks around as well, though. It's kind of a roll of the dice for me right now
Mm.
and what I think is going to happen. But how THCA vapes work, it's not all that different than a live rosin or live resin cart. right? It's not 95% THCA because that would be crystalline, right? It's significantly lower percentage, usually with CBD, usually with, unfortunately for me, what I would say is, unfortunately, there's a lot of Delta 8 with THCA out there. There's THCP, HHC, these other things in these carts so that the liquid will stay liquid. And for myself, I won't personally consume a THCA vape product that's bought on the hemp market because I don't know what it's been cut with to get there, and it's not for me. If it continues and let's say the Farm Bill codifies and says THCA is allowed, knock yourself out. In that hypothetical world, I would aggressively seek regulations that make sure those products are being safely created and these other cannabinoids that are less known to science aren't finding their way in there.
Yeah, then I would be able to renew my lawsuit against Schedule 3 marijuana because if THCA is greenlit by the next iteration of the Farm Bill, that is completely absurd to keep marijuana at Schedule 3. Just abjectly, completely absurd. Yeah.
100% agree. And that's the ideology I come from. We can stabilize this and show that hey, people are getting high from this. It's cannabis. It's regulated. Consumers are being safe. And no one's dying. Our country isn't going down a hellhole like everyone thought it would. All these prohibitionists thought it would. It makes it a lot easier to argue that marijuana is now fairly arbitrary. This whole distinction is stupid. Let's just get rid of the 0.3% and let's move everything in the marijuana side to the hemp version of legislation and regulation that's a lighter
And
lift
call
while
it
keeping.
cannabis, and then
Yes,
hemp is
yes.
industrial purposes of
Yep,
cannabis. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Well, we'll
And
see if it gets there. I'm of the opinion that I think THCA is going to be gone. I think that all these semi-synthetics are going to be gone, but that the beverage space has got sufficient partnership already with alcohol to allow for natural cannabinoids in the beverage space. But there's going to need to be some type of regulation and so like I think that I can also see
do you
them
think
shutting it
edibles
down
are
with the
here to
farm
stay
bill.
too? Like
Um,
you mentioned the beverages, but do you think the edibles are here to stay too?
not with the 0.3% delta 9 dry weight basis. No, I think the 0.3% delta 9 dry weight basis has to change to address the edibles and to address the beverages, because then you get into reliable dosing. And so like this gets and so maybe they can pick it up in Schedule 3 regulation of how to say, like the DEA could be like, these are the products, these are their dosage, and here's how you're supposed to deliver them. And then suddenly, but then it relates back to hemp isn't marijuana. And so I thought the 0.3% was it can't get you high. That was its reason for being. Now they're going to need to define it in dosing as opposed to in a percentage of what the plant actually is.
And we're seeing states do this now, right? The states that are embracing hemp, they're not embracing hemp and then leaving milligram caps completely undefined.
Right.
If you're getting regulations or if you're getting legislation that creates regulations, it's coming along either legislatively or later through rulemaking with some form of milligram cap. And again, ideologically, I don't believe milligram caps should exist. However, I understand the need for them today, and I understand the need for them to get to the future. And so in that world, generally we support milligram caps. We'd like to
Yeah.
see at least 10 milligrams a serving, 100 milligrams a container, because if you're trying to use this product, anything less than that is a significant lighter dose, and you're cutting out a huge portion of the market. But I'm not upset that Minnesota's at 5 and 50. What's interesting though is I'll tell you is that I think that we might see Minnesota actually raise the amount of servings per drinks, and I think the reason is a bunch of the legislators, now that it's legal, have been consuming hemp beverages. And guess what
Mm-hmm.
happens? You develop a tolerance if you're a regular consumer, and all of a sudden the 5 milligrams aren't getting them high anymore. And so they go to the
Right.
10, and suddenly the 10's not enough. And they're like, this is dumb. It's doing nothing to me. Why can't I drink a 50? And so
Right.
the prohibitionists of yesterday are turning into evangelists of today, and they're starting to realize that these milligram caps are fairly arbitrary, and the tolerance spectrum is so wide that
Mm-hmm.
no one can drink a fifth of whiskey and be like, I have such a high tolerance, I didn't even feel it. No, you
Well, Frank
handle it
Sinatra when he was in his prime, and
perhaps.
so but you're
But that
right.
tolerance range
However,
is so much wider in cannabis than it is in alcohol
yeah,
Yeah.
that it doesn't
it
make as much
is.
sense as it does in alcohol.
But that's why I think, let's say there's no caps, there's still going to be mandatory labeling and
Yeah.
Certainly.
concentration. And so,
Yeah.
For
like,
sure.
no, you have to be like, how much did you have? You had this many milligrams. Because, like, the doctor's going to
Right.
want to know, and
Sure.
everybody's had
Sure.
bad trips. So, you're going to have like those micro doses. But after a while, sure, raise it. But then you're going to get into that problem where, like, there's 22 grams of sugar in that beverage that Cole showed us, which means that you can only have 66 milligrams. And so, like, that arbitrary 0.3 is what you're trying to hit. Like, a 4 gram gummy is going to have like 12 milligrams. And so,
Yeah.
like, you have this arbitrariness, which doesn't do any service to anything, nor does it help the end consumer. So we need and this gets beyond what we can do. So maybe the DEA could say, like, and the DEA, I think, has the authority to be able to say this. People would say that Lochner, not Lochner, the other one, Looper replaced it. The Chevron doctrine being overturned means that the DEA can't say this, but I don't agree with that reading when it comes to the DEA under its core powers of this Controlled Substances Act writing this new rule that it has been vested with jurisdiction to do. They could define marijuana in such a way, leaving the hemp definition as the agricultural commodity, and define marijuana as all these finished products with dosages and what cannabinoids are legal and what cannabinoids are not. And to a certain extent, I hope they do that, so that there is a set of rules, because that would light a fire under the hemp people's asses like we haven't seen. And so then they would maybe hopefully come to the table and say, like, hey, marijuana, hemp, let's regulate the plant how we want to regulate the plant and get legislation. But we're a pretty divided country, 50-50, and you need 60 votes in the Senate to break a filibuster. So good freaking luck getting
Yeah.
10 Republicans to agree with 100% of the Democrats and break a filibuster to legalize or regulate the cannabis plant sensibly. We need that legislation. And so I don't know when we're going to get there, but I think once Schedule 3 marijuana comes, and if it just shuts down intoxicating hemp, yikes, because, like, the marijuana industry is going to be like, oh, cool, glad I didn't waste all that money. But then the hemp industry is going to be like, oh, fuck you. And they're going to call all their members of Congress. And then Congress is going to be like, I didn't do anything. The DEA did it. Well, we can't have the DEA do this. And that's when they might have to actually work together. But man, like, it was real hard to even, like, with this stuff in Minnesota, that was in 23, it was still a party line vote to get it to go. Still. And so, is it going to be a party line vote even without, even with hemp getting the rug pulled out from under it? I don't know.
I will say that, you said hopefully we can get these hemp people to talk to marijuana to try to work together. I have personally been trying to do this. I tried to get a hashtag going on LinkedIn, hashtag cannabis together. I reached out to multiple marijuana trade associations. As I mentioned before, I went and actually spoke at a couple of these conferences. I am passionately advocating that these two industries work together towards sensible legislation for both of us because look, I don't see any version of this where in 10 years from now, hemp and marijuana are creating the same products under two different rules. I don't see that happening. I
Right.
think eventually this will consolidate. And when it does consolidate, I would like the legislative package around consolidation to fall not in a crazy regulate the shit out of brands, but more of the hemp version of a light lift to keep consumers safe and labels accurate. And this is the narrative I'm trying to get marijuana on board with. And I think in
Yeah.
California, we may actually see this for the first time because I think that the marijuana companies and the trade associations were pretty excited to get rid of hemp while at the same time wanting to leverage hemp and have dual integration so they wanted to make hemp products and ship them, but then not let hemp retailers sell hemp products from out of the state.
Right.
And so they kind of wanted to double dip, right? Like we support hemp for us, but we don't support hemp for hemp people. And I think they really thought they were going to get that. And when 2223 failed, and then this emergency regulation came out, I think even the marijuana trade stations were like, wait a minute, this isn't a good look for cannabis that we're saying zero detect THC is the only thing that's safe on the market. It's not a good look that these products are being painted as hyper dangerous when maybe some of them are, but AB 45 existed. There was already good regulations in California to ensure these products were safe. What was missing was enforcement. No one was enforcing it. And so I think the marijuana trade associations have kind of realized we may have gone the wrong direction here, and let's at least start having conversations with hemp. And I think there's some bad blood starting to be mended through a very egregious and offensive approach by Newsom. And I'm hopeful that these two industries will merge and put their conflicts behind them and stop thinking about, well, it's not fair because, well, cool. It's not fair that so many minority communities have been negatively impacted. It's not fair that people are in jail for it today. There's lots of things about how the government has treated cannabis is unfair. We all agree to that. How can we get to a place where we feel it's fair? And let's
Right.
stop living in archaic systems that we, on the surface, will say, this isn't fair and it's stupid, but you have to come over and play in our sandbox. Why don't we build a new sandbox that is drastically better for everyone, and then we're all playing in the same sandbox? And that's what most of us in hemp are trying to do. We're trying to, there's no way we're going to get a marijuana bill passed within this next session, but we could get a hemp bill passed. And with a little time under the belt, with that hemp bill passing and things stabilizing, stigma starts to go away and it
No,
gets
but money
arguments
starts to
for.
come in, and so then like, once you get money starting to come in, you want the money to keep coming in, and so that's where you're going to get squirreliness. And so what you really need to do, and so that's why I'm like, add marijuana to CRSA, because you're going to have to get both of them under the tent at the same time with the same rules. Otherwise, you're going to have one with this head start and this other one that's just in the lurch, and then you're going to, what you would actually want if you're the hemp operator, you'd want to be able to be accumulating all this wealth, acquiring more market share, and ensuring that your hemp operators are dying as much as you can. And so then once that falls apart, you could pick them all up like a vulture. And it's just
I mean,
business.
some you're certainly not wrong that that's probably how a lot of people go about business. That's not my approach. I don't advocate for that approach. That's not going to be me. And maybe I won't exit for $4 billion someday because I'm not vulturistic like that. But and I don't think a lot of the folks in the space are vulturistic. There certainly are. I can probably name a couple if I wanted to in the hemp space. But ultimately, I think that when we talk about it needs to be fair, there needs to be parity. These are two different industries. That's true from a legislative standpoint and a regulatory standpoint. But remove the rules and the laws for a second and talk about the entities actually in the industry that are the businesses. How many marijuana companies remove dispensaries for a second? Because this is the one thing that I think is a mistake that the marijuana industry stuck in still is the requirement for a dispensary inherently. Remove that group for a second. What percentage of existing marijuana brands are now in hemp? Right? I don't know the number, and I'm not going to try to predict the number, but it's a lot more than it was a year ago, and it's a hell of a lot more than it was 2 years ago. And so when we say these regulations aren't fair to marijuana, well, not fair to who? The entities that are already playing on both sides and are starting to make money on hemp as well. They're not being hurt by hemp's pathway. They're flourishing using the hemp leverage. And the more marijuana companies that do that, the stronger the argument is like, hey, I'm a company. I've been running a hemp and a marijuana brand for 3 years. By the way, my products are identical. Both are compliant. Why is this side of the plant so onerous? This is ridiculous. And there's a really good argument for that. And when you have the entities themselves all on that same page, because they're both, those entities are on both sides of the framework, that's where the real change happens. And those marijuana companies are actually benefiting from this hemp legislation. So we can't say the marijuana companies aren't going to benefit from positive stabilization of the hemp industry. We'll say
But you need to
marijuana
understand that the
companies.
marijuana companies have dispensaries. It's like 50% of the industry are these dispensaries. You just can't say, we don't need them.
Well, and I was going
And
to
say,
say,
if you do that,
I
yeah,
watched the Dales report to your point, Tom, and feel free to keep going after
yeah.
I say this, but I think I saw this on the Dales report. They were saying this model that hemp is doing, which is making it available D2C and in retail is really, all of these big companies rely on a brick and mortar model, or AKA dispensaries, right? Tom,
Right.
did anything
That's
else you want?
exactly it. Like we do not have delivery in Illinois, and
But I
we
guess
don't
my
even have
question
drive-throughs.
is
Right.
like, why, and I think Chris, maybe you were going in this direction, like, why don't you do it like the other companies have started to? Like Curaleaf, like I'm kind of surprised Curaleaf and GTI have with as because they are in the same boat, with the same model, right?
Right.
Why don't you as well, I guess.
I'm not a rich man, and so like I have finite resources. I don't have enough to get a dispensary going, but I have enough to get a dispensary offering going, and then get the capital from investors and my own money to be able to become operational to serve customers cannabis that you're not allowed to buy online and that you're not allowed to have delivered to your house or even a drive-through. And so there's thousands of such dispensaries out there operating pursuant to a license right now. And to leave those guys out in the wind is going to make that merging of them impossible. So like
That,
the
yeah.
alcohol regulation system is the three tier. It's not a two tier. It's a three tier. And so very few companies have the Apple Store. It is the retailer aspect of it and the license to sell that
Right.
product to people.
I
And then
hate
go try to buy cigarettes online.
this
And
analogy is
there's
almost
regulations at it. Yeah.
this analogy has almost become cliche at this point, but like essentially like your argument sounds like the taxi medallions versus Uber, where it's like have you heard that analogy before? Like I said, I don't mean to use a cliche analogy at this point, but have you heard that one yet?
Yeah, I've heard it, and I don't think it's applicable in this respect because you know all these people that are operating those dispensaries, uh, if you want their help to get the laws changed, you can't just say fuck you. You're all going to be gone. And if I said that to the hemp people, I'm not going to get their help. You know, and by the way, they should be gone because that's never the intention of the law to allow for psychoactive cannabis to be sold without regulations.
Right, but I
So
guess
like,
like
no,
I think well, crap. Yeah, I already used this example, and you already know this, Tom. But this soda that I've been
Mhm.
using, like the River Bluff
Right,
people do it, and they're like literally in the exact same boat as you. Like
right.
they've got their Illinois license, and they have to deal with all this shit, and they've just decided like, fuck it, we're gonna do this. And
And I think this is where the sunken cost fallacy rears its ugly head, right? Is it's because we've
Let me see
been
their
doing this,
P&Ls. Let me see their
we
P&Ls.
what's
Were they
that?
going to show me? Can I see your books? Is anybody going to show me their books so I can see like how the profits and then the cash flows work on these?
oh,
On what?
On these companies, on these businesses. Like, why don't you do this? Because just because you make money doesn't mean you make money.
Right. I'm not really sure what the intent of that comment is, but what
Well,
I'm
like
saying
just
is there's a
saying that I should
sunken
just start
cost
openly and
fallacy.
notoriously selling hemp that gets you high, so that I can get a cash flow from it doesn't necessarily help me get my dispensary open. And I have asked, like I've asked the regulators, can my dispensary sell hemp products? And if they tell me I can, I will. Like I'll carry your line of beverages. But I would like to be a retailer. I don't want to be a producer. Now you're going to force everybody in the industry to be a producer.
No, not at all. It's this fallacy that because we've always done this, we have to keep doing it. But in my opinion, the dispensary model is anti-normalization. You're saying this thing is so dangerous, it needs to be locked over here, way out of sight. You need to go through two doors, show your ID 7 times. This whole concept is the antithesis of normalization. And
Right. That's
it
why I
is
said
on
we should bring it together. And so, like, if you want to sell hemp, you should have a license to sell that. And so, if you want to sell cannabis, you should have a license to sell that. Put them together. If you want to sell it in a building where you're going to, how do you check the IDs? What's your recall policy? Like, how do you have staffing?
sure.
Like, and then what's your security protocols? All of those types of things. That's great. But then you can't just say no dispensaries. It's
But
It
why
would be
not? We sell
impossible.
alcohol in gas stations. We sell alcohol in C-stores. We
Every
sell
one of those is
alcohol at grocery
sold on a
stores.
license. Every one of those is sold on a license, and
And
the
I'm supporting a
municipality doesn't have to
license.
license them.
I'm supporting a
Right.
license.
That's right. And so like so you need legislative change to be able to get there. And so if you're
Agreed.
going to not fall into a whole bunch of people that have dispensaries using their cash to call their elective representative and make donations to their campaigns to shut down the thing that's going to make their business go out of business, they're going to do that. You know, the fossil fuel industry has been doing that for decades. You know,
Yeah. No, agreed. And the reality here is when you create a point of distribution system that is locked down so tightly that few can operate and you can't sell other products. There's a person online that comments they own a dispensary and they're like, as soon as I can sell food and drinks and magazines and other things in my dispensary, I'll support cannabis being sold outside of a dispensary.
oh, we
And
can
that's
now.
what's that?
Illinois' new rules allow me to sell periodicals,
Right.
beverages,
And so he's a
food. Yeah,
California dispensary owner, just as
yeah.
an example. But I agree. But my point is, saying that a dispensary needs to be this, you can get a liquor license to sell liquor in a variety of retail types that are not solely liquor based. However, even in states where it's not required, liquor stores still exist. And usually they're more craft connoisseur. That's where you're going to get the stuff you really like. Grocery store stuff and gas station stuff is going to be your mass market appeal, but not really, fancy. And this is what dispensaries need to do because in their market right now, people are forced to purchase from a dispensary. So you don't have to operate a great business. You don't have to pick the best products. You don't have to listen to your consumers. Now, in a large market with a lot of dispensaries, of course you do, but less so than if the gas station down the street could sell it. And when that
Okay,
happens,
look, the
just like
gas station down the
cigars,
street is selling it. And so like the operators in Illinois, the ones that were not in the original 110 suck. They aren't making very much money. They may
right.
be breaking even. That's it. And because they just go down the street and they go to the closest place where they can go buy THCP gummies and vapes, who knows what's in them, and THCA flower.
That example proves the fact that if you open up access for human beings and adults in the country, you will have more pull through. And that's exactly the point. By
Right,
continuing
but
to
it
limit it
also
in these other
stymies the
stores,
ability for us to be able to get these licenses out. And so you are just pointing more at you need legislation. And so
agreed.
like if you right, you need legislation to be able to open that up. And so
Yeah.
I'm fine for figuring out how to license operators that want to retail it. But you can't just have one set of rules for the retail and then no rules for the same product. That's absurd. That is
Yeah,
Captain Cuckoo Bananas.
I
Yeah.
agree. So why argue the point that the more onerous version is the better version?
It's the one that's codified.
Hemp laws are codified in multiple states.
There's okay, the hemp laws are codified in Minnesota, in Missouri. There's no hemp laws in Illinois that are codified. We
In,
need one.
in Illinois for sure. And there's
Yeah.
lobbyists right now trying to get some codified action. But to say that, well, because it's not codified in Illinois, we should never codify it. I still think it's an opportunity to create legislation that it shows a better pathway that can be integrated. And if the marijuana industry was like, hey, we're totally on board with this, let's unify this thing into one plant and make it easy, hemp would be totally for it. We're
But then
not
you're going to need a retailer license.
sure. Charge $500 for your retailer license. Who cares?
All right. The $500 for the retail license, they charge us $250 to apply for ours, and it's $60,000 a year or $30,000 paid in 2 years. So
Right. And don't you
$60,000
think
over
that's
2 years.
stupid?
Yes, this city that wouldn't like there's like 10, 20 different places you can go buy weed, but they don't want any more regular dispensaries, and then they're going to require you to pay 5 grand a year to them.
And I think
So
that's
now I have to,
ridiculous.
well, okay, do you want good jobs in this industry or not? Do
Of
you want to be
course.
like a well, you're arguing for gas station attendants. That's what you're arguing for. You're arguing for people that are trying to work two different jobs, don't have a 401k, don't have any benefits for where they work. Because in this situation where you haven't controlled the supply to allow for larger cash flows, you don't get any unionization. You don't get anything besides minimum wage. And then the other thing that you get is complete consolidation. And so you're going to have the cannabis industry effectively being the tomato industry. So it's all going to be done by migrant labor. There's going to be 4 companies that own the whole thing, but you can buy them in any grocery store or any restaurant. I don't think that's the right policy goal or vision.
So this is how alcohol works in most states, not all states. Some states are limited to a liquor store specifically, like we've discussed, and some of those are even state controlled. This isn't how tobacco works. This isn't how
How many companies are in tobacco and alcohol?
Pardon.
Or
few. But that's the government structure.
So who's the real corporatist? Who's the real monopolist? In that respect, the real monopolist are the hemp people, because that's what they're setting up. They're setting up a monopoly where there's only going to be 4 operators that control the entire supply.
How is marijuana going
to because of the license limitations that they have. And so like those extra regulations, like they constrain the supply, and they also constrain the market share dominance.
Okay, so limit licenses
unless you change the license, unless you change the laws.
Sure. So make hemp entities not be able to own more than a couple licenses as well.
I'm good with that. But I think everybody's got to follow the same rules. And so if you're going to be a dispensary, here's the rules. If you're going to sell this product, here's how you do it. And so that's where I think it's going to be really, really limiting, where I think we are a while away from a liquor store versus a bar having a different style of license. That, again, that type of licensing change would take new legislation at our state level. But the other thing is at every state level, because we are a common law jurisdiction, and the marijuana trade did not exist in common law. And so it is in derogation thereof, which means that these comprehensive regulatory schemes that the state set up, that's very often they're privileges. These aren't rights. And so there's like a farming case that's going on now in Minnesota that I think the farmers are going to lose, that says under the Constitution of Minnesota, a farmer has the right to sell their products.
Or something like that.
Yeah. I think they're going to get killed on it. But, the state does a very good job of defending their regimes, but then they just don't do a very good job of protecting the regime that they've set up. They've essentially taken these social equity applicants and they've completely effed them. And then they have all these hemp people that are just taking all the money, and all the owners of these smoke shops aren't the people that the law was trying to benefit. And none of the taxes go to feed the coffers for the R3 programs, where I hoped to be able to have sufficient cash flows to hire a grant writer to help us get more money into the community, which is a DIA where I want to open. And so all these policy goals, and then I want to be able to have a 401k for my employees. I want them to like their jobs. I want them to get paid fair. And so if I have to compete with everybody, if you are effectively turning the retail aspect of the cannabis plant into being a waiter or a waitress or a gas station attendant, those aren't going to be good jobs. And if you're effectively turning the cannabis plant itself into an agricultural commodity, those jobs are going to be on an H-2B visa, meaning they're migrant labor.
I think so
those aren't going to be good jobs either.
This is where we're ideologically opposed here, because to me, the best social equity program is ease of access to enter the market. And right now,
and how many times have you were arrested?
I've been arrested a couple times.
For cannabis?
Yep.
So you don't want to try to win a license and get your own license?
Oh, I won one in Colorado, and you know what I can do with it?
Nothing.
Nothing. It's a gesture. It's a worthless endeavor, because these social equity programs aren't functioning to benefit the people they're supposed to benefit in most cases. It's MSOs that are pulling schemes to put someone in place just long enough to meet the requirement of 60% ownership for 2 years, with buyout clauses where they force them out right afterward. And that one person, that one individual may get some good cash out of that deal for themselves to be the pawn, if you will, but that's not systemically fixing a problem. That's propping up a couple of individuals, making them winners when they deserve to be winners, and then letting corporate monopolies take over the intent of those licenses. When the license is inexpensive to get, when the zoning isn't onerous, when things are easier, now you're looking at an SBA loan. Hey, I've got a great idea. I want a small business loan to get this thing
You
off the
can't get an
ground.
SBA loan, not for cannabis.
No, I know. That's my point, is I'm saying that
Yeah.
that's what real social change looks like, is when a minority individual that's been negatively impacted by these legacy rules that have basically targeted them, they can simply go get a small business loan and
With
actually
what
make an
collateral?
attempt. The same collateral that all small businesses start with, which is virtually nothing, or they put up something they have, or
Or
they
like
find a
Jeff
small amount in
Bezos borrows
investment.
300 large from his father-in-law, or like Mitt Romney gets a couple million, or like Donald Trump gets his entire real estate,
Sure. And
empire
those are
from his
currently
father.
the only type of people that can get social equity licenses in
Those are the only
marijuana.
type of people that can get a loan. The banks don't make loans that they aren't going to get paid back on. And so by having social equity in a limited market state, you now have given that person an asset that they can leverage to try to get open in idealistic terms, in idealistic, theory
It's not
terms.
happening. It's that we don't need
Well,
to
the hemp people
discuss
just
the
go out and
academic.
front run, and then it's like they legalize the illicit market with the hemp operation. So
So
like
there's
the
a lower
value
barrier
of
to
the
entry for
licenses,
minorities.
again, like they weren't going to get that SBA loan to begin with. And so you've just created a system where the people that are going to win in hemp or cannabis are going to be the wealthiest of them. And maybe the social equity aspects of it were set up as, there's this thing called pulling the ladder up behind you.
Mm-hmm.
The MSOs, or the publicly traded cannabis companies, they got their cash flows. Make sure we continue to have these cash flows. We have quarterly earnings, by the way. And so if they just decimate everybody that's going to be trying to compete with them, that keeps their quarterly earnings pretty stable. And we had that problem this year when Missouri allows hybrid dispensaries. Every dispensary can sell medical. Every dispensary can sell adult use. In Illinois, there's only 55 dispensaries that are allowed to sell medical, and medical are the heaviest users. The average medical person buys about like $3,000 worth of product a year. And so they voted that down because of quarterly profits. Yeah. So it's not an easy problem, but it's just like, what is the policy goal you're trying to achieve through the marriage of usage of hemp for personal consumption versus the marijuana industry, which has been for personal consumption the whole time.
And the policy goal is to normalize cannabis use and allow individuals to enter the market that don't have $10 million sitting in a bank account, which is what you need right
That's
now.
what do you? Well, again, I just don't think that that's. Well, how much does it cost to start a brewery?
I mean, I don't have, I've not investigated this, but I'm going to guess you probably, to actually start a brewery, you're probably looking at in an inexpensive state at the right time, at least 250 to have enough runway to get up and going, purchase your
Mm,
property, get your
I'd
licensing.
want more. I'd want like at least 500 to a million, because
Sure.
like renovations are expensive. And so like you got to be able to access the credit markets to be able to really, and then for that, okay, let's say that what's a grow? Like Missouri's got a beautiful micro grow down there. 250 plants and extraction. And so it's a great little thing. I think you can get 250 plants and extraction going for less than $1 million, but I'd still want $1 million budget, because I would want to acquire the real estate, build it out, and then you have to cash flow until the product starts to get shipped out and money starts to come back. Because typically, like you send your invoices. I send them all the time, and they sometimes they say due on receipt, sometimes they say 30 days net, and sometimes the clients read that. But it's one of those deals where you're still going to have this issue that to get to that point, let's say it is $500,000, and you found a bank that's going to give you an SBA loan, and you need to put 10% down. Most people don't have 50 large.
Agreed. But having 50 large is a lot more attainable than having 5 million large.
Well, that's right. And so like the craft grows, I think, were too big. in Illinois. And so like instead of 250 plants, it's about 5 times that size, like closer to like 1250. And so it just that and stupid business planning on the front end. I've seen craft grows with 9 people in it, and I'm like, how come none of you have money? You have 9 people here, which they all thought they'd get the license and it'd be worth $1 bazillion
Right.
because that's what they were told. But either way, if you have, and I think Michigan does a great job of it, and I think Missouri's done a good job of it, you have to have this initial license that makes it inexcusable for you to not have. So that's how you put the guy out of business. It has to be inexcusable for you not to be able to have a license, or you are going to be off a license. And that has to come to the retail level too. You just can't have the guy in the street. And so there needs to be a method for getting the retailer's permit and doing all the security. But then how many of those you have will dictate how much control you're going to be able to have over the cash flows, and then therefore the jobs that you're going to be able to pay those living wages. Or it's just going to be like the tomato industry where you have restaurants and grocery stores and 4 companies making all the tomatoes.
Right, but we live in a society where that's an unavoidable outcome no matter how we slice it right now. And like you just said, alcohol is tightly regulated with a very intentional three-tier system, and it still ended up in a situation where it's very monopolistic. So
Yeah,
we
but
can't solve that.
distribution, like there's good liquor distributing jobs. There are, and there's good brewery drops. I mean, like, especially like in Wisconsin where you have a lot of ESOPs, and so the employee stock ownership programs. So you have like, union made or employee owned
Sure. So what you're
companies.
saying is you
Yeah.
could have a monopolistic or a monopoly style industry and still have good jobs. So saying that the hemp guys are more monopolistic than marijuana because we want four tomato players at the top level and it's going to ruin jobs downstream. Alcohol is a great example of that not happening, right? And so,
The liquor stores don't make a lot of money, and neither do waitresses or waiters.
well, which
And so
is it?
like
Do they have good jobs in the alcohol industry or don't they? Now it's both.
the distributors, they tend to, but then there's very few licenses for distribution.
Yeah.
And so that limiting factor of the licenses, or there's very few companies that have sufficient capital to be able to operate a brewery, and then they still have to operate it lean enough and charge enough money and then have the right distribution relationship with that distributor. So it really is how open do we want the market so that we can have those types of good jobs that they have at liquor distributing, you know?
Yeah, and this is a larger problem than just cannabis. This is
It's
economic.
policy. Yeah.
This is a much larger problem than we can solve one on this Zoom. As much as I'd like to
Right.
think we're two smart individuals and we've got a smart host here, and we can probably solve some problems if we work together. We're not going
But
to
then
solve
you
this
get
one.
twice as many people here, and then half of them as much will agree. And then, so
Yes.
yeah, it's going to be, but if we don't want the DEA to do it for us, and they could, I mean, that might be what happens. You're going to have to figure out a way to get everybody who's got an interest on board for the new regulatory regime.
I generally agree. We're never going to get everybody, right? No,
Yeah.
no position. I mean, we could talk about, is murdering people allowed? And there's going to be a small subset of Americans that are like, yeah, it should be totally allowed, right? We're never going to
Mhm.
get everyone involved here. And I think that the outliers are going to be people that are heavily capitalized in dispensaries and hemp cowboys that want to make whatever they want to make and they don't want any safety regulations. Those two groups are going to be on the extreme side of the left and right, not wanting to meet in the middle. I think everybody else is going to be fine meeting in the middle. I really do. I think at least 80% of cannabis industry in its entirety, marijuana and hemp, agree on most things. Now, how you get there sometimes may be a difference of opinion, right? But at the end of the day, when you say, what should this look like in 15 years? Forget how we get there for a second. What do you want cannabis to look like in 15 years? Most of us are going to paint a very similar picture. And there may be some nuance that's a little different in its economic policy and how we could better take care of our social equity applicants and those sorts of things. But most of the core topics, the foundational legs of the stool, we're all going to agree on. And so I think that heart is there already. and it gets beaten out of us, and we have this impression that we don't agree because, well, that last 1% on how we get there, we totally disagree on, so let's just kill each other to death. Like, hold on. Maybe let's compromise on that 1% instead somehow and work together instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater because we couldn't, 99% wasn't enough for us. Like, that's bullshit.
Mhm.
We can work together.
Yep. We're going to have to figure out a way to do it, or Congress will try to do it for us, or the DEA.
I
I'm
don't
pretty
think
sure
anybody
nobody wants to
wants,
be.
I was going to say, nobody wants
Yeah.
Congress and the DEA to do it for us.
Right.
And so we're
Well,
going to have to work together. And I think we're getting
right.
close to that.
I think we're getting closer to it as well, but trying to figure out a way where the future of cannabis is good jobs and a diverse like amount of players where nobody really has hegemony in the market, because the trend is always toward consolidation. It just
Yeah.
is. So if you could figure out a way to limit the licenses, spread them out, that's going to be the thing that keeps the cash centralized enough to pay those good wages for those employees, to make sure that they're happy that they get to come to work, and save for their retirement and be proud to work in the cannabis space. I don't care if you're a bud tender or on propagation tech, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with those things ideologically. I want the industry to thrive. I want the participants in the industry to thrive. And, generally I'm very pro employee. We try to treat our employees very well. And I think I would hope they would say the same thing. And we support those things. And I think that most people in the space want those things. It's how do we get them in a real way? What can we look to as an industry that's already doing this successfully? And what can we mimic that works and what can we throw out that doesn't, and being open to those things and not just assuming we have to do it this way because it's the way it's been done. Cool, but how should we do it?
That's it. I think it's a good place to wrap it up, Cole.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the only other thing I just really wanted to ask, and unfortunately I don't have the clip queued up, but it's just the idea that like limited markets tend to fail. And I didn't know if we wanted to close on that topic. I know we've went really long and I appreciate your time. We went way over our time, but like that's the idea that I've been that I understand is that markets like this always tend to fail. Like you can't limit participation. Like it's the story of Russia, like communism.
Russia would disagree with you, and so would all the oligarchs that have the money. And then the people that are in OPEC would probably also disagree with you. And like the four companies that control all the ketchup, they'd also disagree with you. And so if, again, like every market, if you go to New Jersey, you go to California, you go to Michigan, you go to Oklahoma, they're all limited because you have to get a license at the community level. And so the community doesn't want you there. You're not getting there. You're
Well,
not getting
and that's
licensed.
actually that's kind of what I mean to say, Tom, is because again, I just to get to the point, like I went to a meeting in Evergreen Park, this like Chicago suburb. I might be butchering the name of the village, but anyways, the 1937 group had one of these limited licenses, and to your
Mhm.
point, they were having trouble finding a community. They had one of the golden
Right.
tickets, and they couldn't find a community to get in, and that's when I learned they were talking about the fact that they did have license limitations at a local level on I about called them hemp shops. They're basically hemp shops, smoke shops,
Mhm.
and liquor stores and everything else. So to your point, like, yes, these things work themselves out at a local level. It's like, why are we placing limitations at a statutory level? That's my question.
Oh yeah, that's regulatory compliance. And so because it's going to cost you dozens and dozens of thousands of dollars to stay in compliance, they want to make sure that you have sufficient customer base to be able to cash flow and not close your doors. And so that's the other aspect of it. And so and I'm all for working with the hemp people to create this is a dispensary. Here's what you need. Here's your security. Here's your inventory control. Here's your lighting. Here's all these things. Do all these. We both have to do them if we're going to sell the same product that gets you just as high. Uh, Fine. But then you're going to get into zoning and licensing restrictions just as well at the local level or at the state level. And then if you give out too many of those licenses at the state level, You can check, like people in New Mexico, they aren't thrilled. People in Oklahoma also not thrilled, because then there's too many of these. They don't want that many stores, because like we're not talking about the 20%, we're talking about the 80%. The 80% don't want a whole bunch of cannabis shops all over the place. And then it gets back to, what do we want these jobs to look like? And so if we're making a financial model and it's not stable cash flows, because you have to have a new indicator. So like not only are you going to get price compression, you're also going to get market cannibalization. And so like take the market share that you have and cut it in half on an annualized basis. And so eventually you're just going to get to a point where you have to say, look, this is a minimum wage job. We need you here from there to there. There's no 401k, there's no match. We're going to fire you anytime. And you're just flipping burgers. And so if there's no such thing as this unlimited market. It is what I would call it's something that an activist sees in an idyllic world. It's not something a pragmatist sees in the real world. And so living in the pragmatic real world, we have to create a system that's going to work for the people that are in it. And so how do we set that up so that the people that are in it can get paid a livable wage? And one of the ways to do that is to control the supply of where that cash goes.
Yeah, and I think that's where, again, the answer is somewhere in between, right? I think, one, you could let the free market just play itself out and see how that goes. We know where it's going to end. It's going to end with 4 tomato companies. You could limit the hell out of it, and it's still going to end up in 4 tomato companies. But the only people that were allowed to even try had a lot of access to capital, instead of potentially some smaller folks being able to enter the space and give their shot at it as well. Um,
And Chris, I'm
Again,
sorry
this
to
is a go
I
ahead.
just wanted to insert the idea too of keeping these license caps. Like I think Illinois is a great example. You have 10 dispensaries per owner, 3 cultivation per owner. I just want to like add that to the mix. I'm not saying like
Yeah,
completely open market, because that does go to where you're all talking about. I think this is like a unique opportunity we have in cannabis, and it's like one of the things I like about the Parabola Center. They say never limit the number of licenses that can be issued, but you should limit the number that any entity may have, so that no,
I
one
think that's a
entity.
wonderful compromise, and it's probably the closest thing we have to a real solution. Because at the end of the day, the problem is we live in a free market capitalistic society. That's how all of our cash functions. Getting a couple of large folks at the top at the end of the race is always going to be the outcome, unless we systemically change how this functions at a very federal level. So in between perfect and imperfect, there's some wiggle room to try to do the best we can with the society we're in. And that's where I think some matching of this, some limitation on license, so that those people can be successful, so that they can manage the cash flow, is really important. But you shouldn't have to be, so ridiculously overcapitalized to even apply for a license. They shouldn't cost you $60,000 to get a license. It's hyper restrictive. It's capitally restrictive, and everything's somewhat capitally restrictive depending on who you're talking to, right? To Tom's
Mhm.
point earlier, even if I said a license is $500 and you can start this thing for $2,500 out the door, some people can't afford that, right? And we can't fix that by licensing our way through it. Giving those people access to capital is something that has to happen at a much larger level, way outside the scope of what our industry can fix. But we can have conversations about, let's come to the drawing board and let's figure out the best way to try to balance these and do something new. And I think in general, most people would be supportive of this.
Tom, I
Yeah,
want to
and
give you
that's
the
kind of
last
what,
word.
well, Illinois kind of did that in the sense they were trying to create market demand calculations. And so then you'd say, all right, what's the average output of Illinois cannabis? And that's how they arrived at these caps that they have. And they were supposed to batch them out in waves. Of course, they didn't expect hemp to become weed and the coronavirus. And so it has really created wrong numbers completely. And so, like your financial models that you use, because you're in this position where it does cost a lot of money to get operational, and so investors have gotten completely burnt from cannabis for the past 4 years, unless they've been on the other side of it, hemp masquerading as weed. And so that has been a growth opportunity. That goes away. You might see people come back into the marijuana money, but it might just be gone because they need to lower the amount of the restrictions that are on your operations. But Illinois tried to set a right balance on it by doing calculations for how much supply was being consumed by the state, and then matching that to a regulatory load and the cash flows that would be there from the market demand that they had. And what they got instead was illicit channels opening up at a geometric rate compared to the velocity that they could open up licensed dispensaries because of the complexities therein, like trying to find zoning in a community that wants you, putting together an attractive investment or other partners that you could bring in so that you get a sufficient capital if you can find a bank that'll allow you to get a construction loan. It's a tough problem, and so it's not so easy as saying, "Oh, this would be great if everybody just could do a free market thing." We don't have free markets. If we had free markets, the SEC wouldn't exist. We have a regulated market because if we allow free markets, DuPont will kill you. So will the tobacco company. So will McDonald's. They'll have data where they see that they're killing you, and they'll keep killing you. And so, like, that's why we have these rules and regulations. We have a yoked free market. It's not just a wild thoroughbred horse that, well, it's thoroughbred and wild don't go together. It's not just like a wild stallion that's out there on the West. It is a broke horse that we can have a lot more utility from because we have rules. Do we have perverse incentives? Absolutely. But we have safeguards built into our system to prevent those perverse incentives. And one of those is reasonable or thought out license limitations. Now, we could have more licenses if the regulatory load on those license holders is lowered. So instead of it costing me $300,000 for regulatory compliance per year, it costs me 30.
Yeah.
Well, that's 270 large. That's real cash. That's market opportunity for other people then.
And it's less onerous on the regulators themselves, so they don't need to be funded as deeply because there's less for them to do.
Right.
I was just gonna let you
Which
guys.
is where that compromise comes into place, right? That's exactly what I'm talking about.
I just want to let you guys keep going. We should just spark up and keep going.
Oh, I gotta wrap. I have a few things that I need to catch up on
I
before I call it a
understand.
day.
I
Yeah.
understand. No, I appreciate you both being so generous with your time and talking about this, like, and really being willing to like get into all the nuances. And as we go forward, I'd love to have you both back on because I see you both as, people that are both vocal about this topic a lot. So, especially as we move forward with the rescheduling hearing in December and, whatever that looks like. Tom, when do you think that's going to wrap up? Just a real quick question. Do you think
Depends on who wins the election.
Oh, fair enough. God damn it. You did
Right.
say that earlier. That's a scary answer, but it's a real answer and I appreciate it. So, all right. Well, Chris, Tom, appreciate you both. Again, folks, thank you for listening and check out the show notes for some of the links that we discussed and to connect with Tom and Chris. Thank you again. We'll see you on the next episode of The Cole Memo. Take care.